the stagecoach lurched to a halt outside the general store in Julesburg, Colorado, sending dust swirling into the hot afternoon air of 1878. And Zara Kovac knew the moment she stepped down that her lilting Polish accent would mark her as different in this rough frontier town where suspicion ran as deep as the well water. She clutched her carpetbag tight against her chest, feeling the weight of every curious and unfriendly stare boring into her back as she smoothed down her travel-worn skirts. The journey from New York had been long and arduous, but nothing compared to the knot of anxiety forming in her stomach as she took in the wooden storefronts and the hard faces of the people moving along the dusty main street. Her uncle had written to her about opportunities in the West, about needing help with his boarding house after his wife had passed, but he had not warned her about the isolation she would feel, standing here among strangers who looked at her like she had crawled out from under a rock. "Excuse me," she said softly to a woman passing by with a basket of laundry. "Could you please tell me where I might find the boarding house run by Tomasz Nowak?" The woman's eyes narrowed, her lips pursing as she took in Zara's unfamiliar features and the musical quality of her voice that shaped English words with rounded vowels and softened consonants. "You one of them foreigners?" Zara felt her cheeks flush. "I am from Poland, yes. I have come to help my uncle with his business." "Well, I do not know about any boarding house run by someone I cannot even pronounce the name of," the woman said sharply, adjusting her basket on her hip. "Maybe you should go back to where you came from, if you cannot even speak proper English." The words stung more than Zara wanted to admit. She had practiced her English for months before making the journey, had studied every grammar book she could afford, but her accent clung to her words like morning dew on grass. "I speak English," she said quietly, her voice trembling just slightly. "I only ask for directions." The woman huffed and walked away without another word, leaving Zara standing alone on the boardwalk with her carpetbag growing heavier by the second. She blinked back the moisture forming in her eyes, refusing to cry here where everyone could see. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to build a new life after losing her parents to fever back in New York. She would not let cruel words defeat her before she had even begun. "The boarding house you are looking for is 3 buildings down on the left," a deep voice said from behind her, and Zara turned to find a tall man leaning against the post outside the general store. He pushed off and walked toward her, with an easy confidence that spoke of someone comfortable in his own skin. His hat shadowed his face, but she could make out strong features, a day's worth of stubble along his jaw, and eyes that held something softer than the hard stares she had received from everyone else. "Thank you," Zara said, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "That is very kind of you." The man tilted his hat back, revealing sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his temples. His eyes were a striking hazel that seemed to shift between green and gold in the afternoon light. "Vince Ashford," he said, extending his hand. "Most folks around here just call me Vince." She took his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the gentle way he shook hers, despite the obvious strength in his grip. "Zara Kovac, I have just arrived from New York." "I figured as much from the luggage," Vince said with a slight smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Welcome to Julesburg. I hope that woman did not sour you on the whole town. Most folks here are decent enough once you get past the initial wariness." "She seemed to think my accent was offensive," Zara said, trying to keep the hurt from her voice. Vince's expression darkened slightly, his jaw tightening. "People fear what they do not understand, and this town has its share of narrow minds. Do not let them make you feel like you need to hide who you are." He picked up her carpetbag before she could protest. "Come on, I will walk you to your uncle's place. Tomasz is a good man. He will be glad to see you." They walked together down the street, and Zara felt acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments that followed them. She caught snippets of conversation, words like foreign and strange, that made her want to shrink into herself. But Vince seemed oblivious to it all, or perhaps he simply chose not to acknowledge it. He talked easily about the town, pointing out the blacksmith shop, the saloon, the small church at the end of the street, with its white-painted steeple that gleamed in the sunlight. "You work with cattle?" Zara asked, noting the rope coiled at his belt and the worn leather chaps he wore over his denim trousers. "Cowboy through and through," Vince confirmed. "I work for the Triple Creek Ranch about 5 miles outside of town. We run about 2,000 head of cattle, supply beef to the railroad camps and the mining operations up in the mountains. It is hard work, but honest. There was a pride in his voice that Zara appreciated, a sense of purpose that reminded her of her father's dedication to his carpentry work back in Poland. "It sounds like important work," she said. "It keeps food on tables and money in pockets," Vince replied. "That is about as important as work gets." He stopped in front of a 2-story building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Nowak Boarding House," in neat letters. "Here we are. Your uncle painted that sign himself last spring. He was quite proud of it." Zara looked up at the building, taking in the clean windows and the pots of flowers on the porch railing. It looked welcoming, more welcoming than anything else she had seen in Julesburg so far. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Ashford. I am grateful." "Vince," he corrected gently, setting her carpetbag down on the porch. "And you are welcome, Miss Kovac. I hope I will see you around town." Before Zara could respond, the front door burst open and her uncle appeared, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile as he caught sight of her. "Zara, my dear girl, you made it." He swept her into a tight embrace, his familiar scent of pipe tobacco and coffee bringing tears to her eyes. He pulled back, holding her at arm's length to look at her properly. "You look so much like your mother. God rest her soul. Come inside, come inside. You must be exhausted from your journey." Zara glanced back at Vince, wanting to say something more, to thank him again for his kindness, but he had already turned and was walking back down the street with that easy stride of his. She watched him go for a moment, wondering about the cowboy who had been the first person in Julesburg to show her genuine kindness. Her uncle ushered her inside, talking rapidly about the boarding house, about the guests they currently had staying, about all the work that needed to be done. The interior was clean and well-maintained, with simple but sturdy furniture and the smell of something savory cooking in the kitchen. It was smaller than she had imagined, but it felt like home in a way that made her chest ache with both hope and homesickness. "I have prepared a room for you on the 2nd floor, Tomasz said, leading her up a narrow staircase. "It is not large, but it has a good window and gets morning light. You will help me with cooking and cleaning, with managing the guests. In return, you will have room and board and a small wage. Does this sound fair?" "More than fair, Uncle," Zara assured him. "I am just grateful to have somewhere to go, someone who wants me here." Her uncle's expression softened with understanding. "I know what it is like to be the foreigner, Zara. When I first came to this country, people treated me like I was stupid because I could not speak their language perfectly. But you are smart and strong, just like your mother was. You will make a place for yourself here. I promise you that." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, dresser, and washstand it contained, but the window looked out over the street and the mountains beyond, and Zara thought it was perhaps the most beautiful view she had ever seen. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her spare dress in the small wardrobe and placing her mother's silver hairbrush on the dresser. Her hands lingered on the smooth handle, remembering her mother's gentle touch as she had brushed Zara's hair each night before bed. Over the next few days, Zara threw herself into the work of running the boarding house. She woke before dawn to start the fire in the kitchen stove, preparing breakfast for the 6 men who currently rented rooms. She learned their preferences quickly. Mr. Henderson liked his eggs fried hard. Mr. Walsh wanted extra bacon. Young Tommy Cooper could eat enough for 3 men and still look hungry. She cleaned rooms, changed linens, scrubbed floors until her hands were red and raw, but she did not complain. The work kept her busy, kept her mind from dwelling on the hostile looks and muttered comments she received whenever she ventured into town. The general store was the worst. Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, seemed to take personal offense to Zara's very existence. She would make Zara wait while she served other customers, even those who had come in after her. She would mock Zara's accent, repeating her words back to her in an exaggerated, cruel imitation that made the other customers laugh. Zara learned to prepare her shopping list carefully, to speak as little as possible, to hand over her money and leave as quickly as she could manage. "You need to stand up for yourself," her uncle said one evening as she helped him with the dinner dishes. "You cannot let these people make you feel small." "What good would it do?" Zara asked wearily. "They have already decided what they think of me. Speaking up will only make it worse." Tomasz sighed, his hands stilling in the dishwater. "Your mother would have given them a piece of her mind, accent or no accent. She never let anyone make her feel less than she was." "Mama had you to stand beside her," Zara said softly. I have only myself." "That is not true," Tomasz protested, but they both knew it was. He was her uncle, not her father, and while he cared for her, he had his own grief to manage, his own life to rebuild after losing his wife. Zara was grateful for what he had given her, but she knew she could not rely on him to fight her battles. It was a Saturday afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, when Zara encountered Vince again. She had been sent to pick up a package at the post office, and she was hurrying back to the boarding house with her head down, trying to avoid drawing attention to herself. She did not see the group of young men lounging outside the saloon until one of them called out to her, "Hey, foreign girl, say something for us. We want to hear that funny way you talk." Zara kept walking, her heart pounding in her chest. "What's the matter? Too good to talk to us?" Another voice, slurred with afternoon whiskey. "Come on, just say a few words. It is real entertaining, the way you mangle the English language." She walked faster, clutching the package against her chest like a shield. She could hear them following her now, their boots loud on the wooden boardwalk, their laughter cruel and mocking. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry, would not give them the satisfaction. "Leave her alone." The voice cut through the taunts like a knife, sharp and commanding. Zara looked up to see Vince stepping between her and her tormentors, his posture relaxed, but his eyes hard as flint. "Do you boys not have anything better to do than harass young women?" "We are just having a bit of fun, Ashford," one of them said, but his tone had lost its aggressive edge. No harm meant. "Funny," Vince said, his voice dangerously soft. "It did not look like fun from where I was standing. It looked like a bunch of cowards ganging up on someone who cannot fight back." He took a step forward, and the young men instinctively moved back. "I suggest you all go sleep off whatever whiskey you have been drinking and think real hard about what kind of men you want to be." They left, muttering under their breath, but not willing to challenge Vince directly. Zara stood frozen, her hands trembling on the package. Vince turned to her, his expression gentling immediately. "Are you all right, Miss Kovac?" "I am fine," she managed, but her voice betrayed her. "Thank you. Again, you seem to make a habit of rescuing me." "I make a habit of standing up for people who deserve better than they are getting," Vince corrected. He gestured down the street. "May I walk you back to the boarding house? I would feel better knowing you got there safely." Zara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They walked in silence for a few moments, and then Vince said quietly, "You do not deserve the way they treat you. I hope you know that." "They think I am stupid because of how I speak," Zara said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "They think I am less than them because I was not born here, because my words sound different. But I am not stupid. I can read and write in 3 languages. I can calculate figures in my head faster than most people can, with pencil and paper. I can cook and clean and manage a household. But none of that matters because when I open my mouth, all they hear is foreign." Vince stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Your voice is the most beautiful sound I know," he said, and the sincerity in his tone left no room for doubt. "It is like music, the way you shape words. It reminds me of the stream that runs through our ranch, all those different notes and rhythms blending together into something that makes the world feel bigger and more interesting. Anyone who cannot hear that beauty is deaf in all the ways that matter." Zara stared at him, completely unprepared for such words. Heat flooded her cheeks, and for the first time since arriving in Julesburg, she felt something other than shame about her accent. "I do not know what to say," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," Vince replied gently. "I just wanted you to know that not everyone in this town is blind to who you really are." He cleared his throat, looking almost shy for the first time since she had met him. "Actually, I was wondering if you might like to take a walk with me tomorrow afternoon. After church, perhaps? There is a place just outside of town where the wildflowers are blooming, and I think you might enjoy seeing it." A walk. He was asking her to take a walk with him, to spend time with him beyond these chance encounters on the street. Zara's heart fluttered in her chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten in the loneliness of the past weeks. "I would like that very much," she said. Vince's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good. I will come by the boarding house around 2 o'clock, if that suits you." "It suits me perfectly." That night, Zara lay in her narrow bed and replayed his words over and over in her mind. "Your voice is the most beautiful sound I know. No one had ever said anything like that to her before, had never made her feel like her difference was something to be celebrated rather than hidden. She fell asleep with a smile on her face and dreams of a cowboy with kind eyes and gentle hands. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm, and Zara took extra care with her appearance. She wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the blue in her eyes, and pinned her dark hair up in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Her uncle noticed her preparations and raised an eyebrow over his coffee. "You look very nice today, Zara. Any particular reason?" "I am going for a walk this afternoon," she said, trying to keep her voice casual, "with Mr. Ashford." Tomasz set down his cup, studying her with the keen eye of someone who had not forgotten what it was like to be young. "Vincent Ashford is a good man," he said finally. "Honest, hard-working, respectful. But you have only been here 2 weeks, Zara. You do not need to rush into anything." "It is just a walk, Uncle," Zara assured him, though her heart was beating fast with anticipation. "He has been kind to me, that is all." "Kindness is a good start," Tomasz agreed. "Just be careful with your heart, my dear. I do not want to see you hurt." Zara promised him she would be careful, and then she went to church with him, as she had every Sunday since arriving in Julesburg. The service was held in the small white church at the end of the main street, and Zara was painfully aware of the stares and whispers that followed her as she took her seat in the back pew. She kept her eyes fixed on the minister as he preached about loving thy neighbor, about treating strangers with kindness, and she wondered if anyone else in the congregation felt the bitter irony of those words. When the service ended, she hurried out ahead of the crowd, not wanting to deal with the cold shoulders and pointed comments. She walked back to the boarding house with her uncle, helped him prepare lunch for their guests, and then changed out of her church clothes into a simpler day dress that would be more suitable for walking. Vince arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, looking scrubbed clean and handsome in a white shirt and dark trousers. He had shaved and combed his hair back, though one stubborn curl fell across his forehead in a way that made Zara want to reach up and smooth it back. He held his hat in his hands and gave her a smile that made her stomach flip. "You look lovely, Miss Kovac." "Zara," she said, returning his smile. "If I am to call you Vince, then you must call me Zara." "Zara," he repeated, and the way he said her name, with careful attention to each syllable, made it sound like something precious. "Are you ready?" They walked out of town together, following a dusty trail that led toward the rolling hills beyond Julesburg. The afternoon sun was warm on Zara's shoulders, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and prairie grass. Vince pointed out landmarks as they walked, telling her stories about the land and the people who had settled it. He talked about his work on the ranch, about the cattle drives and the long hours in the saddle, about the satisfaction of seeing calves grow strong and healthy under his care. "How did you come to be a cowboy?" Zara asked, genuinely curious. "Did your family have a ranch?" Vince shook his head. "My father was a farmer back in Missouri. He died when I was 15, and my mother followed him a year later. I worked odd jobs for a while, trying to save up enough money to keep the farm, but it was a losing battle. When I was 18, I signed on with a cattle drive heading west, and I never looked back. I learned everything I know from an old cowboy named Red Murphy, who took me under his wing. He taught me to rope and ride, to read the weather and the land, to treat the animals with respect. He died 3 years ago, and I still miss him every single day." There was a sadness in his voice that Zara recognized, the particular ache of losing someone who had shaped who you became. "I am sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "It sounds like he was a good man, and that he saw something special in you." "He saw a scared kid who did not know the first thing about cattle," Vince said with a rueful laugh. "But he was patient with me, and he believed I could learn. That belief made all the difference." He glanced at her. "What about you? What was your life like before you came here?" Zara told him about growing up in Poland, about her father's carpentry shop, and her mother's beautiful singing voice. She told him about the decision to immigrate to America when she was 12, about the cramped tenement apartment in New York where they had lived with 3 other families, about her father's struggle to find work and her mother's determination to make a home, even in that tiny, crowded space. She spoke about the fever that had taken them both within days of each other, about the hollow feeling of being alone in a city of thousands, about her uncle's letter arriving like a lifeline when she had been on the verge of despair. "I thought coming here would be a fresh start," she said, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. "I thought I could build a new life, maybe find a place where I belonged. but it seems like I carry my foreignness with me like a brand, something that marks me as not belonging no matter where I go. You belong here, Vince said firmly. Anyone who says otherwise is wrong. They had reached the place he had told her about, a shallow valley carpeted with wildflowers in every color imaginable. Zara caught her breath at the beauty of it, at the way the blooms swayed in the breeze like a living tapestry. There were purple lupines and yellow sunflowers, delicate white daisies, and brilliant red Indian paintbrush, all mixed together in glorious abundance. "Oh," she breathed, "it is beautiful." "I thought you might like it," Vince said, pleased by her reaction. "I found this spot a few months back when I was tracking a stray calf. It felt like a secret the land was sharing with me, and I wanted to share it with you." They walked among the flowers, careful not to crush the blooms beneath their feet. Vince picked a handful of lupines and presented them to her with mock formality, making her laugh in a way she had not laughed in weeks. They found a flat rock to sit on, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing, about dreams and fears and all the small details that make up a life. Zara learned that Vince could play the harmonica, that his favorite meal was his mother's pot roast, that he had a terror of snakes that he tried very hard to hide from the other cowboys. She told him about her love of reading, about the poetry she wrote in her journal late at night, about her dream of one day opening a small restaurant where she could cook the dishes her mother had taught her. "You should do it," Vince said. "Open a restaurant, I mean. I bet people would come from all over to taste food made with that much love and care." "People would not come if I was the one serving them," Zara said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "They would be too busy mocking my accent to taste the food." Vince shifted closer to her on the rock, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Not everyone is like those people in town, Zara. There are good folks out there who would appreciate what you have to offer, and the ones who cannot see past their own prejudices, they do not deserve your food or your time." "You make it sound so simple," Zara said softly. "It is simple," Vince insisted. "Not easy, but simple. You decide who you are and what you are worth, and you do not let anyone tell you different." Zara met his eyes, those shifting hazel eyes that looked at her like she was something worth seeing. "How can you be so sure? You barely know me." "I know enough," Vince said. "I know you are brave enough to travel halfway across the world to start a new life. I know you are strong enough to keep your head up when people treat you poorly. I know you are kind and smart and determined. And I know that when you speak, I could listen to the sound of your voice forever and never get tired of it." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Zara had never felt before. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was certain Vince must be able to hear it. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Vince reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips brushed against her cheek, leaving a trail of warmth in their wake. "Because from the moment I saw you standing on that boardwalk, looking lost and scared but refusing to cry, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Because your accent is not something to be ashamed of, it is part of who you are, and who you are is someone extraordinary. Because I think you might be the most interesting person I have ever met, and I would very much like to get to know you better, if you will let me." "I would like that too," Zara said, her voice barely audible over the thundering of her heart. "Very much." They sat there as the afternoon light began to slant toward evening, hands linked together on the sun-warmed rock, and talked until the shadows grew long across the valley. When they finally walked back to town, Vince carried the lupines she had gathered, and Zara felt like she was floating several inches above the ground. Over the following weeks, Vince became a regular presence in Zara's life. He would stop by the boarding house in the evenings after his work at the ranch was done, sitting at the kitchen table while she prepared dinner and telling her stories that made her laugh until her sides ached. He helped her carry heavy supplies from the general store, standing between her and Mrs. Patterson's cruelty with a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any angry words could have. He taught her to ride horseback, patiently guiding her through her fear until she could sit comfortably in the saddle and trot around the corral. In turn, Zara introduced Vince to her world. She cooked him the Polish dishes she had grown up with, watching his face light up as he tasted pierogi and bigos for the first time. She read him her favorite poems, translating them from Polish to English, and trying to capture the rhythm and beauty of the original words. She told him about her parents, about the life they had dreamed of in America, and Vince listened with the attention that made her feel truly heard for the first time since their deaths. The people in town noticed, of course. Tongues wagged and speculation ran rampant about the cowboy and the foreign girl. Some people seemed genuinely happy for them, offering Zara tentative smiles when they passed on the street. Others grew even more hostile, as if Vince's affection for her was a personal insult they could not forgive. Mrs. Patterson was the worst. One afternoon when Zara came into the general store with a list from her uncle, the woman looked her up and down with undisguised contempt. "I suppose you think you are something special now, do you not?" she sneered. "Got yourself a cowboy wrapped around your little finger. Well, let me tell you something, girl. Men like Vince Ashford do not marry foreign trash. They might play around with you for a while, but when it comes time to settle down, they choose proper American women." The words hit Zara like physical blows, but before she could formulate a response, another voice spoke up from behind her. "That is enough, Martha." It was the doctor's wife, Mrs. Reynolds, a quiet woman Zara had only spoken to briefly after church. "You have no call to speak to anyone that way, and you know it." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed an ugly red. "I am just speaking the truth, Eleanor. Someone needs to tell this girl how things work around here. The only thing you are doing is showing everyone exactly what kind of person you are," Mrs. Reynolds said calmly. She turned to Zara. "Miss Kovac, I apologize for my fellow townswoman's rudeness. Not all of us share her narrow-minded views." Zara managed a shaky nod, her throat too tight to speak. Mrs. Reynolds took her arm gently and guided her out of the store, leaving Mrs. Patterson sputtering behind the counter. Outside, the older woman patted Zara's hand kindly. "Do not let that bitter old woman get to you, dear. She has been nursing her grievances for so long that she does not know how to do anything else. Vincent Ashford is a good man, and if he has chosen you, then you must be someone special." "Thank you," Zara managed, blinking back tears. "That means more than you know." "I know what it is like to be an outsider," Mrs. Reynolds said softly. "I came here from Boston 20 years ago, and for the longest time, people treated me like I was putting on airs because of the way I spoke. It took years for them to accept me, but eventually they did. Give it time, dear. Show them who you are through your actions, and the good people will come around." That evening, Zara told Vince what had happened, expecting him to be angry. Instead, he looked thoughtful, his fingers drumming against the kitchen table. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about the future, about what I want from life. I have been a cowboy for 10 years now, and it is good work, but it is not what I want to do forever. I have been saving my wages, putting aside every penny I can spare. I have almost enough to buy a piece of land and start my own small ranch. Nothing huge, just enough for a modest herd, and maybe some chickens and a garden." Zara's heart began to beat faster, sensing where this was going, but afraid to hope. "That sounds like a good plan," she said carefully. "It would be a better plan if I did not have to do it alone," Vince said, meeting her eyes directly. "Zara, I know we have only known each other for a little over a month, but in that time, you have become the most important person in my world. I cannot imagine building a future that does not have you in it." "Vince," she whispered, her hands trembling. He reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "I am not asking you to marry me right now, because I know that would be moving too fast. But I am asking if you might want that someday. If you might want to build a life with me, start that ranch, maybe open that restaurant you dream about. I am asking if you can see a future where we are together." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks, but for the first time in weeks, they were tears of joy rather than pain. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I can see that future. I want that future." Vince stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. She could hear his heart beating fast beneath her ear, could feel the slight tremor in his hands as he stroked her hair. "Then we will make it happen," he murmured, "together." They stood there in the kitchen, wrapped in each other's arms, and Zara felt something settle deep in her soul. This was home. Not the boarding house, not Julesburg, but this man who saw her for who she truly was and loved her anyway. This man who thought her accent was beautiful, who encouraged her dreams, who stood between her and cruelty without hesitation. The next morning, Vince came to the boarding house before dawn with a horse saddled and ready. "Come on," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "I want to show you something." Zara had learned to trust his surprises, so she bundled up in a shawl against the cool morning air and let him help her onto the horse. They rode out of town as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, following a trail that led deeper into the rolling grasslands. After about an hour, Vince reined in his horse near a small creek that burbled over smooth stones. Cottonwood trees grew along its banks, their leaves rustling in the morning breeze. The land rolled gently away from the water, offering good grazing and shelter from the worst of the weather. To the east, the rising sun gilded everything in golden light. "This is it," Vince said, dismounting and helping Zara down. "This is the land I want to buy. 200 acres, with water rights to the creek and good grass for cattle. The owner is willing to sell for a fair price, and I almost have enough saved." He turned to her, his expression hopeful and nervous at the same time. "What do you think?" Zara turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. She could see it in her mind's eye, the small ranch house they could build, the barn for the animals, the garden where she could grow vegetables and herbs. She could imagine children playing by the creek, could hear their laughter mixing with the sound of the water. She could picture herself and Vince growing old together here, building something lasting and true. "It is perfect," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It is absolutely perfect." Vince pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I am going to work extra hours, pick up whatever jobs I can find in town. By fall, I should have enough for the down payment. Then we can start building our future for real." True to his word, Vince threw himself into work with renewed determination. He worked long days at the ranch, then took odd jobs in town in the evenings, repairing fences, shoeing horses, anything that would add to his savings. Zara saw him less frequently during those weeks, but when they were together, every moment was precious. Zara, for her part, continued her work at the boarding house and slowly began to find her place in the community. Mrs. Reynolds had invited her to join the ladies' sewing circle, and while Zara had been hesitant at first, she discovered that not all the women were like Mrs. Patterson. Some of them were genuinely interested in hearing about Poland, about her life in New York, about the differences and similarities between their worlds. She taught them Polish embroidery stitches, and they taught her how to quilt in the American style. One day, young Tommy Cooper, one of the boarders, mentioned that his sister was getting married in a month, and the family was struggling to figure out how to feed all the guests they had invited. Without really thinking about it, Zara offered to help with the cooking. Tommy's mother, Mrs. Cooper, was skeptical at first, but when Zara prepared a sample meal for her, the woman's eyes had widened with delight. "This is wonderful," she exclaimed, tasting the roasted chicken with herb butter that Zara had prepared. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "From my mother," Zara said simply, "and her mother before her." Mrs. Cooper hired her on the spot to prepare the wedding feast, and Zara threw herself into the work with enthusiasm. She spent days planning the menu, shopping for ingredients, preparing dishes that blended her Polish heritage with American tastes. The wedding was held on a beautiful Saturday in late July, and when the guests tasted the food, the compliments flowed freely. "Who made this incredible beef stew?" one guest asked. "Where did you find such a talented cook?" another wanted to know. Mrs. Cooper proudly pointed out Zara, and instead of the scorn she had expected, Zara found herself surrounded by people wanting to know if she did catering for other events, if she might be willing to teach cooking lessons, if she ever thought about opening a restaurant. The attention was overwhelming but wonderful, and when Vince found her later in the evening, she was flushed with success and happiness. "I am so proud of you," he said, spinning her around in a quick dance to the fiddle music. "You showed them all exactly what I have known from the beginning. You are extraordinary." Word of Zara's cooking spread quickly through Julesburg and the surrounding ranches. Soon she was being hired to cater birthday parties, church socials, and community gatherings. The money she earned, she saved carefully, adding it to what Vince was putting aside for the land. Their dream was coming together faster than either of them had dared hope. It was a warm evening in late August when Vince came to the boarding house with news written all over his face. He found Zara in the kitchen, finishing the dinner dishes, and swept her up in his arms, lifting her off her feet. "I did it," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I bought the land. It is ours, Zara. Well, it will be ours. I signed the papers today." Zara threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. "Oh, Vince, that is wonderful." Her uncle appeared in the kitchen doorway, alerted by the commotion. When he saw them embracing, he smiled knowingly. "I take it this is good news?" "The best news," Vince said, setting Zara down but keeping an arm around her waist. "Mr. Nowak, I know I have not formally spoken to you about this yet, but I love your niece. I want to marry her, to build a life with her on the land I just purchased. I am asking for your blessing." Tomasz looked at Zara, his expression serious. "Is this what you want, my dear?" "More than anything," Zara said without hesitation. Her uncle nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing, with one condition. You must promise me that you will never try to make her into something she is not. Her accent, her heritage, the things that make her unique, those are not flaws to be corrected. They are gifts to be treasured. I would not dream of changing a single thing about her," Vince said solemnly. "She is perfect exactly as she is." Tomasz clapped him on the shoulder. "Then welcome to the family, Vincent Ashford. Take care of her, or you will have me to answer to." They were married on a crisp September morning, with the golden autumn light streaming through the church windows and the smell of hay and apples in the air. Zara wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, with delicate Polish embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Vince wore his best suit, and when he turned to watch her walk down the aisle on her uncle's arm, the look of love and wonder on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, there was a tense moment of silence. Zara felt her heart clench, half expecting Mrs. Patterson, or one of the other hostile townspeople, to speak up. But the moment passed without incident, and when Vince slid the simple gold band onto her finger and said, "I do," in a voice that rang clear and strong through the church, Zara felt her fears melt away. "I do," she said in return, her accent clear and unashamed. "I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said with a warm smile. "You may kiss your bride." Vince cupped Zara's face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears that slipped down her cheeks. "Hello, Mrs. Ashford," he murmured, and then he kissed her soft and sweet, a promise of all the kisses to come in their life together. The reception was held at the boarding house, with tables set up in the yard and food that Zara had prepared over the previous week. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread and butter, apple pie, and spice cake. There were also Polish dishes, the foods of her childhood that she had made in honor of her parents who could not be there to see this day. Some of the guests were hesitant at first, eyeing the unfamiliar foods with suspicion, but once they tasted them, plates were quickly emptied and requests for recipes began. "Mrs. Reynolds gave a toast, raising her glass of lemonade and smiling at the newlyweds. "To Vincent and Zara, may your love be as enduring as the land you will build your home on, and may you always remember that true beauty lies in our differences, not in our similarities." Even some of the people who had been cold to Zara in the beginning seemed to soften that day. They saw how Vince looked at her, how he held her close as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, how he whispered something in her ear that made her laugh with genuine joy. They saw how happy she was, how her accent seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker when she spoke with pride about the life she and Vince planned to build. And perhaps, for the first time, some of them began to understand that her difference was not a threat, but an enrichment to their community. Mrs. Patterson did not attend the wedding, which was a relief to everyone involved. After the reception, Vince and Zara rode out to their land, in a wagon loaded with wedding gifts and the few possessions they owned. Vince had spent the past month building a small cabin near the creek, just one room with a loft and a stone fireplace. But to Zara, it looked like a palace. He carried her over the threshold as tradition demanded, both of them laughing as they bumped against the doorframe. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford," Vince said, setting her down gently in the middle of the cabin. "It is not much yet, but we will build it into something grand together." "It is perfect," Zara said, looking around at the rough wooden walls and the simple furniture Vince had built with his own hands. "It is ours, and that makes it perfect." That first night in their new home, they lay together in the narrow bed Vince had constructed, listening to the sound of the creek and the wind in the cottonwood trees. Vince held Zara close, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Zara replied honestly. "When I first came to Julesburg, I felt so alone, so lost. I thought I would never find a place where I belonged. But then you saw me, really saw me, and everything changed. "You changed everything for me too," Vince said. "Before you, I was just going through the motions, working and saving, but not really knowing what I was saving for. You gave me a purpose, a reason to build something lasting." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future. They would expand the cabin over the winter, adding a proper bedroom and a kitchen big enough for Zara to cook the way she loved. In the spring, they would buy their first cattle and start building their herd. Eventually, if all went well, they might add a barn and maybe even build a small restaurant on the property where travelers along the trail could stop for a home-cooked meal. Fall turned to winter, and the newlyweds settled into the rhythms of ranch life. Vince worked from dawn to dusk, tending the small herd of cattle they had purchased with their combined savings and making repairs to the property. Zara transformed their simple cabin into a home, sewing curtains for the windows and braiding rag rugs for the floors. She planted a winter garden with cold, hardy vegetables and made friends with the neighboring ranchers' wives, who came to visit and share recipes and gossip. When the first heavy snow came in December, they were snowed in for 3 days. Instead of feeling trapped, Zara felt cozy and content. She and Vince played cards by the fireplace, read to each other from the books they had collected, and talked about everything and nothing. On the third night, as they lay in bed listening to the howling wind outside, Zara shared the news she had been holding close to her heart for weeks. "Vince," she said quietly, "I am going to have a baby." She felt him go still beside her, and then he sat up, lighting the lamp on the bedside table so he could see her face. "A baby?" he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be," Zara said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "By next summer, we will be 3. Vince's face crumpled with emotion, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you for this gift, for choosing to build this life with me." "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would," Zara replied, her own tears flowing freely now. "Thank you for making me feel like I belong." The winter passed slowly but peacefully. As Zara's belly grew round with their child, Vince became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more and work less. He took over the cooking, though his meals were nowhere near as good as hers, and made her laugh with his terrible attempts at Polish dishes. He built a cradle from smooth pine wood, carving delicate designs into the headboard, and Zara sewed tiny clothes from soft flannel. In March, Mrs. Reynolds came to visit, bringing with her a stack of baby blankets and a wealth of advice. She had delivered many babies in her years as a doctor's wife, and she assured Zara that she would be there when the time came. "You are strong and healthy," she told Zara. "You will do just fine, and that husband of yours will probably wear a hole in the floor with his pacing, but that is what husbands do." Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers, even more abundant than the year before. Vince carried Zara out to see them, settling her carefully on a blanket in the middle of the valley where they had first really talked, where he had first told her that her voice was beautiful. They sat together in the warm sunshine, Zara's hand resting on her swollen belly, and Vince's hand covering hers. "Do you ever miss Poland?" he asked. "Or New York?" Zara thought about it for a moment. "I miss my parents," she said honestly. "I will always miss them, but Poland feels like a dream from another life, and New York was never really home. This is home, here, with you." "What will you tell our child about your heritage?" Vince asked. "About Poland and your family?" "I will tell them everything," Zara said firmly. "I will teach them Polish songs and how to make my mother's recipes. I will tell them about their grandparents and the courage it took to come to a new country. But I will also teach them that home is not just about where you come from. It is about where you choose to build your life and who you choose to build it with." Their son was born on a hot June day, arriving just as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of red and gold. The birth was hard but mercifully quick, and when Mrs. Reynolds placed the squalling infant in Zara's arms, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Vince was beside her immediately, his face wet with tears as he looked down at the tiny person they had created. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Vincent Ashford, after Zara's uncle and his father. But from the beginning, they called him Tommy. He had Vince's hazel eyes and Zara's dark hair, and he made his opinions known from the very first day with lusty cries that could be heard clear across the property. Uncle Tomasz came to visit when Tommy was 2 weeks old, bringing gifts and tears of joy. He held his namesake carefully, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes. "He looks like your mother," he told Zara. "She would have been so proud of you." As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Vince's hard work and good judgment paid off with a growing herd and a reputation for quality cattle. Zara's cooking skills brought a steady stream of visitors to their door, ranchers and travelers who had heard about the meals she prepared and were willing to pay good money for them. They expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen with a large stove that made Zara clap her hands with delight. Tommy's first word was Papa, but his second was Mama, pronounced with a slight musical quality that reminded Zara of her own accent. She sang to him in Polish, teaching him lullabies her mother had sung to her, and Vince would sit and listen with a soft smile on his face. When Tommy was 2 years old, Zara became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier even though she was chasing after an active toddler. Their daughter was born on a cold November morning, arriving quickly and with far less fuss than her brother. She had Vince's calm temperament from the start, observing the world with serious blue eyes that turned hazel as she grew. They named her Catherine Marie Ashford, calling her Kate from the beginning. She was the perfect balance to Tommy's boisterous energy, content to sit quietly and watch the world go by. As she grew older, she would follow her mother around the kitchen, wanting to help with everything from kneading bread to stirring soup. The ranch continued to grow and thrive. Vince hired 2 young cowboys to help with the work, and Zara finally opened the small restaurant she had dreamed about, converting the new barn into a dining space where she could serve meals to travelers and locals alike. She called it the Creek House, and it quickly became known throughout the territory for the best food between Denver and Cheyenne. People came from miles around to taste Zara's cooking, and many of them commented on her accent. But now the comments were different. Now they said things like, "What an interesting accent," and "Where did you say you were from?" They asked her to teach them Polish words and share stories about her homeland. The accent that had once marked her as an outsider became part of what made the Creek House special, a reminder that good things could come from faraway places. Mrs. Patterson came to the restaurant once, 5 years after Zara and Vince's wedding. She looked older and more tired, the bitterness she carried having carved deep lines into her face. She ate her meal in silence while Zara served her with the same courtesy she showed every customer. When it came time to pay, the older woman counted out her coins slowly. "The food was good," she said grudgingly, not quite meeting Zara's eyes. "I suppose I was wrong about you." It was not quite an apology, but Zara recognized it as the closest thing to one that Mrs. Patterson was capable of giving. "Thank you for coming," she said simply, and left it at that. She had learned that some wounds took years to heal, and some people would never fully overcome their prejudices. But that did not have to define her life or her happiness. Tommy started school when he was 6, attending the small schoolhouse in Julesburg. He came home the first day upset because some of the other children had made fun of the way Zara spoke when she dropped him off. "They said Mama talks funny," he told Vince, his small face screwed up with anger. "They said she sounds weird." Vince knelt down to his son's level, his expression serious. "Let me tell you something, Tommy. Your mama's voice is the most beautiful sound I know. It reminds me of music and poetry and all the good things in the world. Anyone who cannot hear that beauty is missing out on something special. Do you understand?" "I think so," Tommy said slowly. "I like how Mama talks. She sings the best songs." "Exactly," Vince said, pulling his son into a hug. "So do not let anyone make you feel bad about who your mama is or where she comes from. Be proud of your heritage, all of it. You are part Polish and part American, and that makes you twice as lucky as most folks." When Kate started school 2 years later, she came home with her own stories of children teasing her about her mother's accent. But Kate, with her quiet strength, handled it differently than her brother had. "I told them that Mama can speak 3 languages, she reported matter-of-factly, and I asked them how many languages they could speak. That made them stop laughing." Zara listened to her children's stories with a mix of sadness and pride. She hated that they had to defend her, but she loved that they did so with such conviction. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and maybe by the time her children had children of their own, accents and differences would be celebrated rather than scorned. The years rolled by like the creek that ran through their property, steady and sure. Tommy grew into a tall young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, learning everything Vince could teach him about cattle and horses and reading the land. Kate inherited her mother's love of cooking and her father's head for business, and by the time she was 15, she was helping to manage the Creek House and talking about maybe opening a second location in a nearby town. Zara and Vince grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still took walks out to the Valley of Wildflowers every spring, sitting among the blooms and talking about their dreams and their memories. Vince's hair turned silver at the temples, and lines appeared around Zara's eyes from years of smiling. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young cowboy and the scared immigrant girl who had found each other in a dusty frontier town. Uncle Tomasz retired from running the boarding house when Zara and Vince's youngest child, a surprise baby boy they named Andrew, was born. He moved out to the ranch, taking over a small cottage they had built near the main house, and spent his days playing with his grandchildren and tending his garden. He lived long enough to see Tommy marry a sweet rancher's daughter named Mary, and to hold his first great-grandchild, a baby girl with dark hair and hazel eyes. He passed peacefully in his sleep one winter night, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the creek, where the sound of running water would always keep him company. The railroad came through Julesburg in the 1890s, bringing new people and new opportunities. The Creek House became even more popular, with train passengers making special stops just to taste Zara's cooking. She hired help, teaching young women her recipes and her techniques, ensuring that the traditions her mother had passed down to her would live on. One afternoon in the late summer of 1895, Zara and Vince sat together on the porch of their house, watching their grandchildren play by the creek. Tommy's 3 children were visiting for the weekend, along with Kate's 2 boys, and the sound of their laughter filled the air like music. "Did you ever imagine this?" Zara asked, reaching for Vince's hand. "Back when we first met, did you imagine we would build all of this?" "I imagined something," Vince said, lacing his fingers through hers. "But the reality turned out better than anything I could have dreamed up. You turned out better than anything I could have dreamed up." "You saved me," Zara said softly. "That day on the boardwalk, when everyone else looked at me with scorn and suspicion, you saw me. You heard me. You told me my voice was beautiful when everyone else said it was ugly." "I only told you the truth," Vince replied. "Your voice was beautiful then, and it is beautiful now. Every word you speak is like a gift, reminding me that love does not require perfection or sameness. Love requires seeing and accepting and celebrating someone exactly as they are." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. One of the grandchildren, Tommy's youngest daughter, came running up to the porch, her face flushed with exertion. "Grandma, will you teach me one of your Polish songs?" she asked eagerly. "Papa says you know the best songs." Zara smiled and pulled the little girl onto her lap. "I would love to teach you," she said, her accent still present after all these years, still musical and distinct. She began to sing, her voice strong and clear, the Polish words flowing like water over stones. Vince listened with his eyes closed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When the song ended, the little girl clapped her hands. "That was beautiful, Grandma. What does it mean?" "It is a song about home," Zara explained, "about how home is not just a place, but the people who love you and accept you for who you are." The child thought about this for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "Like how Grandpa loves you, even though you talk different than other people." "Exactly like that," Zara said, kissing the top of the girl's head. "Grandpa taught me that being different is not something to hide or be ashamed of. It is something to celebrate." The little girl ran back to play with her cousins, and Vince opened his eyes to look at his wife. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I have been thinking about something lately." "What is that?" Zara asked. "About legacy, about what we leave behind when we are gone. Our children and grandchildren, obviously, and the ranch and the restaurant, but also something less tangible. We have shown people that love transcends differences, that accents and origins and backgrounds do not matter nearly as much as character and kindness. That is a legacy worth being proud of." "We did that together," Zara pointed out. "I could not have done any of it without you." "And I would have been lost without you," Vince countered. "We were meant to find each other, Zara. I have always believed that. Out of all the towns and all the territories you could have ended up in, out of all the cowboys you could have met, Somehow, fate brought us together. Fate and a stagecoach, Zara said with a smile, and your kindness when I needed it most. As the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the mountains in shades of fire, Zara reflected on the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From Poland to New York to Julesburg, from being a scorned immigrant to being a respected business owner and beloved grandmother, she had traveled so far and overcome so much. But none of it would have been possible without the cowboy who had heard beauty in her voice when everyone else heard only difference. Tommy came up to the porch as the stars began to appear, holding his youngest son in his arms. "Mama, Papa, dinner is ready. Mary has everything set up in the dining room." They all gathered around the long table that Vince had built 20 years earlier. 3 generations of Ashfords joined by love and laughter. They held hands as Vince said grace, thanking God for the food, for the family, for the life they had built together. When he finished, Zara added a few words in Polish, as she always did, a reminder of where she had come from and the parents who had given her life. "What did Grandma say?" one of the grandchildren asked. "She thanked God for bringing our family together," Vince translated, "and she thanked him for blessing us with love that sees beyond surfaces to the truth of who we really are." The meal was filled with conversation and stories, with jokes that made the children laugh and memories that made the adults smile with nostalgia. Kate served the food she and Zara had prepared, traditional American dishes mixed with Polish specialties that had become family favorites over the years. Andrew, now 13 and already showing signs of inheriting his father's height, entertained everyone with his attempts to pronounce Polish words, his earnest efforts making even the mistakes endearing. After dinner, Vince pulled out his harmonica and played a few tunes while the younger grandchildren danced around the room. Then Zara sang, her voice still strong despite her years, the Polish lullabies mixing with American folk songs in a blend that perfectly represented the life she had built. Tommy played the fiddle he had learned on as a boy, and Kate kept time by clapping her hands, and the music filled the house with warmth and joy. When the evening finally ended and their children and grandchildren headed to their own homes or to the guest rooms upstairs, Zara and Vince stepped out onto the porch one final time. The night was cool and clear, the stars spread across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Vince wrapped his arm around Zara's shoulders, pulling her close against his side. "Thank you," Zara said softly. "For what?" Vince asked, genuinely puzzled. "For everything. For seeing me when I felt invisible. For loving my voice when others mocked it. For building this beautiful life with me. For showing our children and grandchildren what real love looks like. For never trying to change me into something I was not. For all of it." Vince turned to face her, his hands cupping her face the way he had on their wedding day all those years ago. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair and illuminated the love in his eyes. "Zara Ashford, you are still the most extraordinary person I have ever met. Your voice is still the most beautiful sound I know. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, every moment, every challenge, every joy. You are my home, my heart, my everything." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of the promise that their love would endure whatever time they had left and beyond. And as they stood there under the vast Colorado sky, surrounded by the land they had built their life on and the family they had created together, Zara felt a peace settle over her soul that was absolute and unshakable. She had traveled so far from that scared girl on the boardwalk, the one who had been scorned for her accent and made to feel less than. She had become a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a successful business owner, and a pillar of the community that had once rejected her. But more than any of those accomplishments, she had become someone who knew her own worth, who understood that her voice and her heritage and her difference were not flaws, but gifts to be celebrated. And she had found a love that saw her completely, that accepted her wholly, that celebrated every part of who she was. A cowboy who had heard music in her accent and had spent a lifetime proving to her that beauty comes in many forms, that home is where you are truly seen and loved, and that the most important journeys are the ones that lead us to become our most authentic selves. As they walked back into the house hand in hand, ready to climb the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for decades, Zara sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For the stagecoach that had brought her to Julesburg, for the cowboy who had seen beyond her accent, for the life they had built from nothing but love and determination and faith in each other. The house settled around them as they prepared for bed, the familiar sounds of home and family and belonging. And when Vince pulled her close in the darkness, whispering, "I love you," in a voice rough with emotion, Zara responded in Polish, the words her parents had taught her, the language of her heart. "I love you too," she then translated, her accent still strong, still musical, still beautiful. Today, tomorrow, and always. And in the morning, they would wake to do it all again, to tend their ranch, to cook for their restaurant guests, to play with their grandchildren, to build on the legacy of love they had created, to show the world, in their own small way, that differences should be celebrated, that accents are beautiful, and that true love sees beyond surfaces to the precious soul beneath. They had started with nothing but hope and each other, a scorned immigrant and a kind-hearted cowboy, and they had built an empire of love that would outlast them both, living on in their children and grandchildren and all the generations yet to come. And that, Zara thought, as sleep claimed her, was the greatest success anyone could hope for. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a journey ended, but the love they had built would go on forever. A testament to the power of seeing someone truly, of hearing beauty where others hear only difference, of choosing love over prejudice every single day. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years, as a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful sounds are the ones that are different from what we expect, and the greatest loves are the ones that see us exactly as we are and say, "Yes, you are perfect just like that." The end.